The best way to learn anything new is to always be prepared to hear something totally unexpected that will touch the dry within 45 minutes and pay 3 to 1 if the matador is an elephant. And now back to the election results. One man said he once thought about the size of the universe and it made his head hurt. He then thought about the size of his head and made the universe recoil. After a childhood of excited curiosity and wonder, this one man, once he was grown and finally heard of such matters as mysticism, enlightenment, and all of the other efforts to become more conscious, immediately decided on the spot, and I'm quoting, "That's it. I'll do it. I'll pursue it, and to it devote my entire life, or the next 8 years, whichever comes first." Being civilized is merely a metaphor for being civilized. Daddy, is this why on some worlds the word education is considered a fallen euphemism? A contemporary concern update. There are no such people as poor communicators, merely people with nothing to communicate. Soon after the garden unpleasantness, life told everyone, lay down when you get tired, but soon had to revise it by adding, I meant mentally, you dolts. A mother advised her daughter, don't ever get in a relationship with a man who requires your encouragement and reassurances to keep himself up and running. And the girl replied, are we actually a mother and daughter talking, or is this simply my consciousness speaking to my attention regarding routine awareness? If the mystical adventure is the one valid quest for the cure, then remember this as you travel along. As long as you're condemning, you ain't a curing. Any good photographer knows that if you take enough shots of any action situation, you'll eventually get one that makes it all look like magic. Same as with a good thinker and his thoughts. As local conditions was showing an out-of-galaxy relative around Earth, he said to him, if you think humans hate physical exercise, just wait till I tell you about another part of them. Only the extremely dim-witted should any longer be excused for not realizing why the big guns and most torturous weapons bring up the rear of the parade. Said weapons being, of course, the past. One day, one man said to his son, since all of the intellectually civilized talk to themselves, you have a certain individual choice. You can either talk to awareness or talk to attention. Now, which will it be, boy? And this alone kept the lad busy for the next 30 years. Title. The way ordinary man's so-called creative imagination works vis-a-vis one shop's notation involving both his outdoor activity and fast food dining. Now for the item. Note C. On drugs, I go a-fishing, then eat at Long John Silver's. I could have been crude and drug in drugs somewhere in there, but you're supposed to understand. Some updating of our New Intelligence Dictionary. If entertainment is paying someone else to talk to yourself for you, then education is paying someone else to argue with yourself for you. And a fella in back whispered, thank God you can't do that regarding trying to be more conscious. See, that last part was a joke. Hormones make you think one thing, neurons another. A mystic makes himself think. One man was kind of amazed to concede on his own that to get ahead, you have to have a head. His mother, watching him write this over his shoulder, suggested that instead of saying he was amazed at this, that he say he was surprised at this. Although parent cells aren't normally arranged to do you harm, the past is never a vital source of advice. A man once asked the town philosopher, just because you can explain something, does that necessarily mean that you understand it? And the wise one replied, hell, just because you understand something doesn't necessarily mean you understand it. The king, in an imaginary moment of extraordinary insight, directed the guards, round up all the conclusions in the kingdom and shoot them. A tip from the old spiritual weight room. No one can meet the standards of their religion's founder who do not have muscles of steel in the area of attention. Those anxious to expand their consciousness could consider a mystic as one willing to spot you until you can do it alone. Also, situated somewhere in this general vicinity rests the reason that physical rituals remain more popular than less specific internal exertions. 1, 2, 3, 4. A city employment tip. If you want attention but have no particular talent, there are still several occupations open to you. One day, one man told local conditions, I have a headache. And conditions nodded as if to say, yeah, I know. But the man persisted. But I've had one most of my life. And conditions just shrugged. And the man raised his voice, well, what's the meaning of it? And conditions finally replied, it's just growing pains. And in a peculiar way, the man was somewhat relieved. What's the difference between the simple, the ordinary, the religious, and the mystical? Oh, the simple. The simple don't feel as though they're sick. The ordinary do. The religious do, but don't know where is the cure. And the mystical ate them all up in his own stomach years ago. Anyone can be as smart as everyone else. And anyone can be as dumb as everyone else. But it takes, ladies and gentlemen, a real man to be both. A spacecraft from another galaxy hovered over Earth while they sent down a scout to see if men were ready yet to have their consciousness expanded. And when he returned to the ship, he presented his findings. Quoting, the young are too dumb and the old are too stupid. And the commander of the expedition replied, good Lord, man, do you realize what you just said? You've just given us a perfect report of an endless parade. A boy asked his dad, are you going to make sacrifices so as to give me the advantages you never had? And his old man replied, why should I do that? And the kid said, well, I heard the man next door say that to his son. To his son, the father replied, are we speaking literally here or allegorically? And the lad asked, do you mean about giving me advantages or the people next door? And his dad responded, you think there's a difference? Regardless of what history teaches, it is not poor diet or the black plague that fails man, but the ultimate reality of metaphor. Mama, is this why some men secretly have 3 ears? Artistic hierarchy update. Okay, if inside every mystic is a dead philosopher, then inside every philosopher is a dead poet. Okay? And now from our medical desk comes this item. Drugs only become dangerous and addictive when they cease being entertainment. And a man was so struck. Is this actually trying to tell me something about the nature of ordinary thought? On a particularly trying day, one lad's father said to him, if it makes you feel any better, remember this. Local conditions take orders, same as you do. An example of what those whose awareness is totally held by the parade itself are wont to call progress is typified, for instance, by the changing of a store's opening time from 10 o'clock to 9:30, which as a matter of fact is what it was last year. Okay, for the more serious students of human affairs, a more serious version of the above. What most normally passes for displays of civilized progress are such scenes as important-looking men debating whether bullshit smells worse now or back in grandfather's day. Hate to do it to you, but see, the first part, I know it's a long sentence, complex, but I had some hope. I don't care what they say, I'm going to read it again. An example of what those whose awareness is totally held by the parade itself, comma, are wont to call progress, is typified, for example, by an announcement that a store is changing its opening hours, from 10 o'clock to 9:30, which is what it was last year. A story from the city. As the mystic was filling out the form, the knowledgeable man at the desk whispered to him in the blanks for occupation and hobbies, "If I were you, I wouldn't mention any of that stuff." Under civil conditions, when men's mental powers fail, they oftentimes attempt to call down the wrath of their genes. The simple, to try and distinguish themselves, have little choice but to do so physically or through fashion. Withal, a more complete man is distinguishable only to himself. The past is always condemning the present, and this is why the more conscious must forever stay ahead, way up ahead in the future. Though questions still remain, the investigation continues. The above statement was not issued by the Federal Bureau of Mysticism. One thinker's thought: the body's main hobby is staying alive. The mind seemed to be health, wealth, and power. Somebody's getting the short end. Now this from our Get Simple department. As long as you take mental life seriously, you'll never get more conscious. If you can categorize a particular mystic, something's wrong with either you or him one. As they sat on the porch, a father told his son, "Since your brain stays as agitated as your stomach, do you realize what this means?" And the lad replied, "You mean, do I realize the possibilities this offers?" And the old man responded, "No, I mean, do you realize the obstacles this presents?" And the child said, "Are you sure?" And after a brief reflection, the father said, "You're right, I like your version better." And rock, 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 they both went. When life finally did pull a gun on this one guy, he said, "You better go ahead and kill me, because nothing else you can do any longer frightens me." Spoke like a man, like a real conscious man. Flash! One man got so weary of talking to himself that he damn near stopped. Consciousness as per military strategy. Controlled attention is like a preemptive strike against stupidity. And now a definition from our Collector's Corner. Reality. A mystic's ephemerabilia. Maybe it doesn't help to be literate, but you know, it doesn't hurt. Jesus. Well, One of those, I can make it sound as though it was connected, and I intended to do it all along, and actually had some idea of what I was about to talk about. Having to do with taking, as a rule, I've been saying life seriously, but more specifically, it should be taking mental life seriously. Because anything other than man's mental life is meant to be taken seriously, and if you don't think so, try it, and you be dead. That is, try to do it otherwise. That and what would appear to be the more specifics. For instance, I was mentioning the wasting of one's energy in cynicism, sarcasm, all forms of criticism to man's mental world, such as his leaders. Nowadays that normally refers to most people's minds to political leaders, but it could be any sort of leaders, and I simply pointed out that man, as point blank obvious as it is no longer worthy of any note. It is in contradistinction to the way in which the normal city parade should march. That is, that we still want as our leaders, we still normally have as our leaders, if it's under any sort of stable, continuing condition, whether a state, a nation, a tribe, a religion, a culture, it is you get the meanest son of a bitch, an alpha wolf, in charge. And you just, the way life takes care of itself, you'd normally hope that he's not been inbred enough, or he hadn't been brain damaged enough, and he's not going to turn on the pack itself unduly. Now he's going to turn on it some, which is known as graft, pork barreling, nepotism. And it's like constant. We have now people with suits and ties and living in the nation's capital, writing articles, shocked to find out that high-ranking officials are stealing. They've got their in-laws on the payroll stealing for them. They've just discovered this. How dare this go on? That is the nature, that's part of being the meanest wolf in charge. Albert Schweitzer does not get elected president of Nigeria, of the United States, premier of Italy. He couldn't get elected to a city council post if he was still alive. In fact, he's probably got a better chance now. But I was pointing out that it's an absolute waste of your energy. Plus, it's just further evidence of how stupid you are. That you don't understand that those running government, that's the easy one, but they're running everything else. If it's of sizable consequence and if it has legs, if it's something's been going on, to run it is going to be a fairly mean son of a bitch, even the Pope. Now, I know he smiles and he doesn't appear to be, but trust me. But don't trust me. Listen to the core. They're elected right through there. That's what's driving it. But what you want, whether you know it or not, even those who criticize it, even those with the cushy jobs of writing for some political commentary magazine, criticizing whatever administration's in, or criticizing specific people for being of limited vision, of being greedy, etc. You're wasting your absolute time. Because what they actually want without knowing it is you want the meanest son of a bitch and wolf you can find to take care of the pack. It comes not mentally. It is now discussable mentally. It has been for thousands of years. That is part of what the intellectual life of man's about. That is part of what the civilized parade's about. Is now, I keep saying discussing it and arguing it. Those of you getting better, you should be able to see it. And I can cut down on the syllables. I can cut down on the words. It's denying it. It's not debating the reality of it. It's that's part of the purpose of man's intellectual life, to deny. For instance, I just put out a perfect example of what I just said. Because any intellectual person, right now, I can play their part just as well. I can do them both. Here we go. It doesn't cost any more. Plus, I work free. Which is a lot of times why, in case you hadn't caught on, I use me up here on stage instead of actually bringing in somebody from equity. Because I'm not even going to pay scale when I can do it. At any rate, an ordinary intelligent person can say, wait a minute, I understood what you just said. What you're saying is that we are electing presidents, even letting people take over. Now I'm giving the guy more credit than he deserved. But when I said elected, by the way, do you understand? To carry it a little bit further, there's still areas of the world, as you know, that there are reoccurring coups going on, that people take power physically. But when somebody takes power physically, and now it's a fairly small area, small country, small would-be nation, when they take control, it is, no matter what the news says, no matter what your mind tells you, it is with the acquisition, with the agreement of the people. When they get sick of it, somebody of the populace, one of the ones being oppressed now, will stage their own coup. And even though they will deny it, it's the same position as having a political commentator, someone from the minority party in a democratic type government, to criticize those in power. They can criticize it, but they still want the meanest son of a bitch there. If he's a conservative or a Republican in the United States, he will be criticizing the Democratic president and vice versa. But they still want the meanest son of a bitch that they can find within certain limits to run things, to protect the herd and the pack. And they're going to turn on the pack, they're going to take what they want as best they can. And what you hope for is that they will defend us against outside forces more than they will attack us. That's all you can hope for. That is the optimum. But then to expect from the leaders, or anything other than that, to expect it, you're an idiot. But you might be very civilized, and I could play the part, which I started to do, and accuse me of being an idiot. I could say, well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You sound like you're talking about, I know you're trying to make it sound allegorical that we try and pick out the meanest wolf to run the pack. You're trying to make it sound allegorical, but you sound like you're serious. I think you're serious. And if so, I don't know what to call you except, well, I could say confused, but you're on the verge of nuts. Yeah. I'm somebody talking to me about what I just said. There it is. See, no debate. It's just a denial. And they would be within their rights. That's what you would expect. If they didn't deny it, if I got out and said something like that publicly, or anyone who knew what they were talking about, which of course is a fail-safe because they wouldn't, but here we go. If I did it, the person would absolutely deny it. It would not even be worthy of debate. And they would be properly attuned to even say that they believe that I'm insinuating, that I'm trying to hide what I believe behind the facade of allegory. That what I'm saying is that we actually have a president out of, if it was an elected milieu, that we end up electing normally. The meanest, probably the crookedest. See, I shouldn't do that because that one might get ordinary people and you children out there misled. Meanest covers it. But what you've got to understand is it's not going to be an Albert Schweitzer on that basis. And accusing the meanest wolf, and you put him in charge, which I repeat, you want him in charge because the pack over here, the pack across the borders, the pack on the other island, they, trust me, they have got the meanest son of a bitch and wolf they could find taking care of their affairs. Unless you want to go live with Elvis and the dinosaurs, you and all your kin, you likewise, you want a wolf at least as mean as that son of a bitch, and hopefully more so. But to do it, you got to remember this. It is not going to be Mother Teresa. You can't have it both ways. Now, the more we move into whatever century this is, I know some of you are damn near, I believe, up to the 16th from looking at it. But at any rate, we now have people that we apparently elect them. They have suits and ties, and some of them college education, so they say. But then to imagine that they're going to be charitable, well, I shouldn't put, back to the form of condemnation, don't look at it from the positive side, to think that they're going to be free from the human, I think the word is foibles, of being greedy, perhaps even a shade dishonest, probably very self-serving, to go for an equally educated, dressed up person to observe the president or start looking into his affairs and then go, I believe that he is making money off of his position. An ordinary, serious, sane, educated person, if they had any inkling of what I'm saying, back playing their part, they would not argue this. They would just dismiss it. They just absolutely deny it. They'd say, well, if I'm hearing what you're saying, if you actually mean that, you're crazy. And that probably wouldn't satisfy them, because it's beyond crazy. Crazy if he said something like, well, the president, you know our president? He's not from Arkansas, he's from Mars. Yeah. Then they go, you're crazy. Well, what I just did, if you did it in public, it's why you don't do it in public, it's even worse. Think about it for a second. There is a point to this. That wasn't the point, but a little en passant point. Is they would hear that and go, and they wouldn't know what to call it. It's just like, what they want you to do is hush, because life wants you to hush. You know, they just deny it. It's not just you're crazy. They just and they'd barely hear it. They just you can't face that. You're not supposed to. Think about it. It's not right or wrong. It is the way things are arranged. It is the parade moving. And it's been that way. This is nothing new. I don't mean just from the 16th century, and I don't mean just in Western Europe. I don't mean just here. It's been that way. Go back to when the big guy threw them out of the garden and made them talk. As soon as they started talking, you know, just Adam and Eve, Ken and Barbie, as soon as they went, well, who's in charge? He was the biggest, we'll assume. Had more testosterone. He probably grabbed her and said, I'm in charge. In other words, there's a coup. The world's first big daddy, I mean. Now he went, hey, I'm in charge. Patrice Lumumba. Yeah. Papa Joe. He said, hey, I'm in charge. And he was immediately in charge, because he was, as far as that pack went, him and her, he was the meanest son of a bitch there. And of course, women's always had enough sense. Their hormones have. You know, let men do it. They know how to handle it. Go back and check some of your Greek. There's stories when women get sick of the way men operate. They know how to do it individually and collectively. But let's see, where were we? It has always been the meanest son of a bitch. Anybody that survives, and any pack, that is any religion, anything, that does not, for some length of time, and there's nothing to prove historically, it doesn't matter, it just means that life got tired of them. Life got through, whether it was dinosaurs or some nation somewhere or some tribe of people that seemed to disappear. If they disappeared, you could go back and look. This wasn't the reason. Life just disposed of them as some sort of identifiable group. But you would go back and look, and right toward the end, they were just being overrun by people. And you could, if you had an ordinary mind, you could wring your hands and say, well, they were such decent little people. And, I mean, all the history we have of them, they sit around, they only ate squash soufflés, they were vegetarians, and they knitted. The men wore little sweet dresses, and they took care of their children. There's your answer. Yeah. Remember, that isn't what caused it. And if you say, and you look back, they were actually getting somewhere. There was one of the first groups that ever picked out the wisest man with them. It was an old guy, he was a philosopher, and they put him in charge. For years they'd had a general, and just layabouts, old drunks and people, but they finally decided, let's get this real genteel guy. He was an artist, he played the lute, he wrote poetry. He played the lute, wrote poetry, was real sweet, did some interior decorating on the side, was a philosopher, and 2 years after they put him in charge, people next door ate them up. That's the way it goes. So the point is that there is no question about this. But you understand, from an ordinary view, and I don't mean it's just new, so don't forget where we were. Well, I always keep saying don't forget where we are when I can see that. I mean, I can't necessarily blame it on you when you speak in one sentence that lasts 50 minutes and gives a whole new definition to Rococo or... An ordinary sane person would hear that and not argue with it. They would just deny it. And they would want to deny it non-verbally. It's just turn away from it. Because there's nothing to discuss. And I don't mean just because I'm right. I'm just simply pointing out that's the sort of thing that verbally is not supposed to be presented. And it's not brand new. Because as soon as people could talk, or if you would really prefer, 2 days, 2 weeks after they could talk, they started denying the past. The non-verbal past. What do you mean? Are you saying that the Pope, those nice cardinals, people holding in their sex energy, their aggression, they're getting there in private, they're old men, they're wise, they've been studying philosophy and theology, and they sit there in private, these, however many it is, and they vote. They collectively select the wisest among them. And you're trying to insinuate to me that out of everybody they dealt with, and you're saying maybe they don't even know it, that they picked out the meanest son of a bitch and cardinal around, and they made him pope? Sure. Unless life's tired of the Catholic Church and about to cash them in. But you understand, you can't say that. I don't mean it's some kind of great secret. You just can't say it. I mean, unless you're going to be as stupid as everybody else and waste your time in the same way that they could be criticizing the Pope or the President. What I'm saying is they don't know what they're criticizing. And if you get identified, if you let the parade control your attention, that is, you let ordinary events control your attention, you've got nothing left to do but condemn. You've got nothing left to do but take as intellectual reality, without knowing it, in large part are based upon a denial of your previous intellectual reality. See, the past is continually condemning the present, which I was trying to get to. Would you hurry? Well, maybe. But except not just on the basis that I normally point out, which we were doing last time, and I was about to get to, that your mind does it individually, but also is the feeling that every generation, if you look at it on a larger scale, is every generation. You look, are things getting worse? The one that I reread, I gave you the senior version at the end, is what normally passes for progress out in life amongst those whose attention is held by the parade. That is, just ordinary people. Is exemplified by such things, I guess the sentence got too complicated, but literally, by such things as a place announces. If you didn't like a store, if that sounded too commercial, it would be like the government announce, or a TV station, their news show, or the church announce that due to the increasing demands and interest in our particular church, we have been opening up on Sunday or Tuesday, whatever day they have. We have been opening for services to the public at 7:30. But we have been moved, whatever reason, it sounds as though it's progress. They say, you'll be delighted to know that starting next week, and it's usually with some fanfare, and nowadays was a little PR push, and probably some airplanes, next week we'll be opening for services at 7 a.m. The senior version I gave you on that same page was, another way is progress amongst the ordinaries, important people sitting around discussing, does bullshit smell worse now or in grandfather's day? Which is the same thing as the past continually and the present doing it toward the past, which is, the question is, are the young trashing the old or vice versa? And who wants to do it the worst? But even no matter how you look at it, which can at least interfere with your normal partisan thinking, try to look at both ways, that's not it. Because the basis of it is that you're not just condemning the past, or the past just condemning the future, or the present. It is that what's going on is a condemnation collectively of everyone not knowing it of our speaking as humans, of our pre-verbal history. That's what you have to deny. Thought that'd clear it up. What that means is why you cannot see that as Pope, President, head of the Chamber of Commerce, your father, anyway, let's take President, the leader of your pack, whatever the pack is, culturally, religious, racially, sexually, you pick out the meanest son of a bitch you can find. And any question about whether he's got any talent or intelligence, if you got such a question, you're an idiot. Now, I mean, you could be a fine, decent, upstanding person, but what I mean is you don't understand anything. But everybody else has to go, oh no. Would you repeat that? Maybe I'll repeat it once. They go, as I said, if you think about it, a good, intelligent, ordinary person would not even call me crazy. They just have to dismiss it. It's beyond crazy. It's just, I mean, it's not true. Right. And at that level, it's not true. Where were we? What were we going to talk about? Had something to do with, was it werewolves? I was going to bring out about the simple, which some of you may have caught on, as I constantly do. I use terms like the simple and the crude to sort of get your attention. But the simple and the crude are your fathers, mothers, the president, the pope. It's anybody at the ordinary level. And it's not an attack, it is a the establishment of a relative term to go from there. But I know it sounds a little insulting, and I use it for dramatic purposes. But the simple, if they want attention, which almost all people do, once you are verbal, of course you want it sexually, you want it hormonally, but then after that, post-garden, once you get in the city, as I mean it both literally and figuratively, once you get in the city, it is no longer the attention based simply on sex, at least with men, and now less and less with women. It's just the way things go. That just sexual attraction is not sufficient. Especially with men, there's a little, I wouldn't go into that, but there's, even now, it is still more so with men than women, because women in desperation, that's not a judgment. Women with nothing else to lean on or nothing else to prove at any particular time. A woman can just always turn on sex. Now, what you got to do is have, normally, assuming she doesn't have 3 eyes and weighs 700 pounds, but even then, all you got to do is have a large enough pool of men around to draw from. And she's got attention. But that is a gradual process that I want you to understand. But there's always that, which is the kind of thing that you no longer face up to, such as the meanest son of a bitch running the pack. You didn't lose your place, did you? Oh, no, not me. Okay. So, the item I was going to finally bring up was the one tonight that said the simple, if they want attention, which they do, but the simple to distinguish themselves. That's the way it went. The simple to try and distinguish themselves have little choice but to resort to, but to try and do so physically or through fashion. And that's men and women, so don't get, I'm sure you won't strangled on the passing distinction I made hormonally between men and women. Because now we're talking about the civilized world, and part of the civilized world is people deny that they're simply dealing with sex. Who's that new girl you're with? Boy, isn't she something? Yeah, but did you know that she down there graduated from Vassar? God, did you see the... No, he's saying, you don't have to doubt that. Nowadays, if you need any sort of anecdote to me, just, I guess now the best spokesman for reality is talk shows. That's exactly what's wrong. I'll now speak for ordinary reality. That kind of thinking, that kind of stuff you just said, is exactly, it's right at the heart of the problem between men and women, families, everything. You know what that represents, as a matter of fact? Poor communication between people. They weren't here and heard me point out before. I gave a contemporary concern update, was what it was labeled as, and it said there are no such things, no such people as poor communicators. But you do know that that is now part of the professional and layman's sophisticated lexicon. As you say, well, that's part of the problem between men and women now, is they don't communicate correctly. I mean, it was all right, I guess, in the past for cavemen or uncivilized people, just for a guy to go, "Oh, I like your hips, come here." That day, we're civilized. That's exactly right. We are civilized now, and we now have to say, oh no, that will never do. No. If you doubt it, if you don't like talk shows, find some station playing country and western music videos. Now they even got country music, guys with hats and boots, singing, writing and singing sensitive guy songs. So, what can I tell you except it's all over. But to see what that represents, I assume you get the point. There in the parade, I'm using country music emblematic again, but there it represents a guy, which is the funny thing about being sensitive. So you know what I'm using it to represent, and there it is in the song, whatever it is. But it's a sensitive thing about now how much he appreciates women more, and that a woman is not just a sex object, that now a woman, for a relationship to be so-and-so, that is now reality. And if you say, well, you can say that in the same way that you can say, yes, I voted for our current president because I really liked, when I got down and studied the ideas that he proposed back when he was running for office, the ideas, the suggestions he was proposing having to do with the Social Security system and some new control over the Federal Reserve System, that really struck a note with me. If that was an ordinary, decent human talking, an intelligent person, he wasn't lying, but he's an idiot. He voted for this guy because he recognized he's meaner than that other guy. That's exactly why he voted. But you can't say that. You understand both ways. That is point blank reality, but that is no longer collective reality. And it's not brand new. It's as old as history. That is what I just said, that is no longer reality. I don't mean it just suddenly happened. It wasn't reality within a few hours after Ken and Barbie left the garden. Once they started talking, that was no longer reality. For those of you that didn't get the one last week, or last time we met, you didn't like that said, right after the initial unpleasantness there at Eden, and life said, get out and made them talk. Adam and Eve realized that now they could speak and they were civilized. And Adam said, what are you going to do now? And he said, well, we could go shopping or put on some clothes. And he said, no, we can do better than that. And they thought about it. And then either him or her said, I know, let's start pretending that life is something other than it is. Is that why there's so many popular oldies stations on the radio? Is I pull them out from a week ago or a year ago, and then this time around people go, That would be encouraging, except for this, is years and years ago, I wrote another item that said that the only reason that they call popular music popular is so that you'll think it's popular. So you can be, all of us saying, you can, collectively, we can be somewhat encouraged that I can pull one out after months or years, and then you go, we could look at it as being, increasing understanding, or you could recall that the reason that they keep playing the same songs over and over and over and saying it's popular music is so you'll think it's popular. You go, oh yeah, I like that one. And you didn't notice the first 100 times you heard it, you went, Jesus, that sucks. And then just almost suddenly, so the next time you hear it, have we got that record in the house? Huh? Okay. Sure, it's easy to talk about how you have to handle ordinary people if you're trying to out there, and then have to stand here and deal with the same stuff, affairs. The simple and the crude can only distinguish themselves physically or through fashion, which is what I want to get to is right quick, physically. And it turns out to be fashion, but I put them in both because it is the very close, maybe you can see it a little bit better, nexus between the past, silent, hormonal-based, survival, physical-based life of man and the civilized, intellectual one. Because distinguishing oneself physically in fashion is almost such as whatever the latest fashion is, wearing your cap sideways, wearing your pants baggy, pulling them up high. Fashion is people use as exemplifying how they're distinguishable. What sets you apart? People will also attempt to do so physically, by the way they walk. And it never works also. We've been through this before, but I keep hoping that some of you will have a small brain explosion on your own. Amongst the ordinary, that is the crude and the simple, ordinary people, the way they distinguish themselves individually is by what? By becoming part of whatever in their particular locale, their neighborhood, is the latest fad. That's how you know you're an individual. As you look around, everybody else is now wearing sweatshirts from Ivy League colleges inside out. Nobody ever knows where they start. But somebody does it, and now 2 or 3 people do it, and so you do it. That's how you show that you are an individual. That is not sarcasm, and it is not as simple as an oxymoron or a non sequitur. It's way simpler than that. Well, what is it? Well, what does it look like? Well, I can see what it looks like. What the hell do they want from me? You got eyes? At any rate. To distinguish yourself, you can only do so if you're ordinary, physically, or through fashion. But you understand physical, distinguish. All right, say a guy, one of the old stories, been around for years and still goes on, is some guy, I'll do it real fast and sound like it's psychological flim-flam out there in life, but now you're supposed to see through that. Some little kid, he's 90-pound weakling, and everybody pushes him around in school, women won't pay attention to him, girls won't pay attention to him, can't make a football team, he can't do anything. And for some reason, sometimes it's like something snaps. So one guy finally kicks him hard enough, and he goes off during one summer of his 15th year, 16th year, and spends 10 hours a day, gets steroids off on the side, and goes to a gym somewhere out of town. Nobody knows him. And back in May, when school let out, 10th grade, he weighed 98 pounds. 3 months later, school starts, he shows up for the 11th grade, and the son of a bitch has put on 60 pounds, and I'm talking about like this. And he walks in. That is physical distinguishing of oneself. Except it is also fashion. All right, does anybody see this right quick? You elect the meanest son of a bitch and wolf you can find that's available to be president, but then we make sure, this all of course allegorical, we make sure to dress him up. We play Hail to the Wolf when he comes in, and we all say, Mr. Wolf, Mr. Wolf. And he, more or less, if he needs to, he takes some real quick etiquette lessons, so he picks up the right fork. Says Mr. Ambassador, says the right thing. Except we all know all he is a mean, dressed up, son of a bitchin' alpha wolf that you wouldn't want living anywhere close to you. But you want him in charge. There's the same connection between apparently doing something physically to distinguish yourself. Be an athlete. It doesn't have to be just that simple, but to do something athletic, which still works. You distinguish yourself, but it's also fashionable. Do you understand? Because if you did just that and we weren't civilized, we weren't talking, and all you were was the biggest son of a bitch in the village, that you were just born, you were just the biggest, or you went out and you lifted tree trunks out and did that kind of thing. If you weren't civilized in speaking, it would not be fashionable. You would not be admired, you'd be feared. Period. But you understand, for the physical distinguishing of oneself to become fashionable, you've got to be admired. It's not just feared anymore. Those of you listening good, it's still fear. But you don't call it that. You understand? You say the president was the best choice we had politically. You call it that. But what it was he was the meanest son of a bitch available on the slate, on the ballot. But no. We call it something else. So the only way that they can distinguish themselves, the simple and the crude, is by the old methods. The only ones. See, I was tricky and magnanimous, or tried to be, in the original writing of the item that said the simple, to try and distinguish themselves, have little choice, but to do so physically or through fashion. See, I said have little choice. That sounds, have little choice. They got no choice. And you don't have to look anywhere else. Ask yourself. If you now was trying to distinguish yourself. You understand what I mean by distinguish? That suddenly people, some group of people, that you can get around, they'll go, either know your name or just by looking at you. They know that you are somebody. And then next time they see you, they remember. Think about it. If you had to do it under any ordinary condition, and I don't mean any ordinary condition out there. No, ladies and gentlemen, you know damn well I don't. I mean under here. That if you didn't know any more than you used to know, if you didn't understand any more, and it was now your overwhelming desire to be distinguished in the real sense, in the number one definition, or it should be, to separate yourself, for you to be identifiable, and of course, just you don't know it. See, and that's what we'll get to in a minute. Ordinary people, how do they know they're an individual? They have to be treated that way. You can't go up to somebody that looks real fashionable, hip as clothes, in the right place, and you cannot take them aside. If you could force their talking into their nervous system to respond in an electrochemically valid manner, I think that's what you earth people call tell the truth. Yeah. All right. Well, tell the truth is to electrochemical validity the same as playing Hail to the Wolf is, and he looks real impressive, as that is to him being the meanest son of a bitch that you could find. Same thing. Same relationship. If you were going to try and distinguish yourself, you should be able to feel it immediately. And you didn't know any more, and you were going to try and do it. What could you do? What would you do? You wouldn't even consider outside the possibilities of, well, probably athletics would strike you first. Then you might get around some people to politics, but you would only be interested in trying to do that on the basis you're already a mean son of a bitch. If you were sane, because if you weren't a mean son of a bitch and thought about going to politics, you're an idiot. Or you have a small brain deficiency, which you do. You know, every election some people will pop up. You know, for governor of any state now, or the mayor, there'll be these major candidates, and there'll always be what the press calls fringe candidates, which is correct. It'll be some guy, some 70-year-old retired widowed insurance salesman, and he smiles real nice, and he just says that, you know, the dead spirit of his wife told him to offer himself up for, you know, the governorship, or he just may say, well, I just wanted to make life better for everybody. And he smiles. And everybody, you might want to pat him on the head, you know, like Benny Hill used to that little short guy. Right? But you know he's a fringe candidate. The press don't have to tell you. I mean, as soon as they show, here's the people that qualified the last day to run for office. You look. And they didn't have to say, and plus the guy on the end, the voiceover didn't have to say, well, he's a little old retired insurance salesman. As far as we can tell you, he's living on a pension. They didn't have to tell you any of that. You just looked at him and you realize, he ain't no mean son of a bitch. You know, bless his little heart. You're not going to vote for him. Nobody's going to vote for him. Now ask yourself, back to where we were, if you had to distinguish yourself, not knowing any more than an ordinary person knows, how could you do it? There is to quote myself, there is very little choice. Read, no choice. People attempt to distinguish themselves in ways that now appear to be civilized and tied to the conditions of the parade, whatever part of the parade you're in. Of course, the more civilized the area in which you reside, the more civilized must be your attempt. To wit, if there are parts of the world right now that's fairly uncivilized, if we were in one of those, as you can pick up the paper any day and see, people distinguish themselves in very uncivilized ways. The leader of some faction or got competing tribes in some would-be country, or competing fractions of some old nation state that's falling apart, and one guy, they attribute in the last 6 months he has slain 6,000 people, and his name gets in Time magazine and gets in newspapers. It makes a network news almost every night. And then you hear, even if you're not particularly interested, you just keep hearing his name, and then it says he has finally been deposed because last night his brother-in-law came in and in his sleep chopped his head off with a machete, or, you know, killed him with a machine gun. Simply another mean son of a bitch. If you were going to try and distinguish yourself, how would you do it? How could it be done? There is no way removed from survival, biological, hormonal, crude, physical, alpha wolf level. I even, in passing a few nights ago, let me drag it down, I was talking on another subject, but some of you should get something from this, and I was pointing out that even at the ordinary level, artists do not start out trying to, the context in which I was speaking the other night, they do not start out doing it for money. No artist. If anybody starts out doing it for money, they got no talent. That's not my opinion. All you got to do is look around. If you know somebody, if you got a cousin or somebody that lives next door to you, some teenager, and he says, what I want to do is, I've decided, my father's a lawyer, my mother's a nurse or something, and boy, they went through school and they had all kinds of problems, and you just talking to him one day out over the fence, and you say, what do you want to do? And he says, I decided I'm just going into music. I got me a guitar. And you go, well, I didn't know you were interested in music. And he says, well, I'm not, but I decided, do you know how much even old farts like the Rolling Stones are still making, or Yes, or Deep Purple? These guys keep, you know, putting on their hairpiece and showing up, and they make $100 million. And you say, well, in case you don't know, you do not have to wait for him to plug in his guitar the first night and to hear how he sounds. He got no talent, if that was the truth. Nobody starts out, no one with any sort of creative ability starts out. But notice this, because that's where I left it the other night. There was another purpose. Notice this is very common once they get once they fall into the mainstream of the parade, those that do pop up, there was a well-known Spanish artist, or Picasso, who I was thinking about, that at the time almost turned the art world around by Western history now, painting all these things that the critics originally went, good God, that girl's got 3 eyes, or their nose is going sideways. You drawn, what does it all mean? And supposedly, finally, after he was really in his heyday, that somebody, some critic, after they'd run him through the mill, but by now he was one of the richest men in the world, certainly the most wealthy artist, and that somebody took him aside finally for the 4 millionth time, and he was 50 years old, and said, well, I've heard about you all my life, and some upstart critic says, but I look at this painting, and I can't really make out, well, what does it mean? And he said, to me it means about $50,000. That's pretty common. It's not just with him. There are all kinds of stories like of Handel. That finally in later years, somebody accused me of being a hack. All you do is write for money. And he looked at him like, what are you, an idiot? But notice, I wanted to see, this is connected to the same thing. They are now part of the civilized march of the parade, and they can't help it. I mean, I know it can sound as though they're getting pretty worldly wise. I can make that Picasso bon mot sound like more than it is. Like, well, he finally understood, which he may. Or he may have come to the realization that, the ordinary people don't know shit about painting. I could do anything now I'm popular, and he could. Which you can do it in other fields. It wasn't just him. But it does not mean that that's the way he started out, nor does it mean that that was what distinguished him. And there's no comment on whether, no objective way to talk about art or anything in the civilized world, as you know. But the point is, he is now a part of that element, the ordinary element, that is distinguishing itself by methods that have nothing to do with originality or creativity. He is now part of it, as you have to be or go crazy. Well, or become maybe a mystic or something like that. But at any rate, back to the item, since we're out of tape, you remember, it said that the simple, to try and distinguish themselves, have little choice but to do so physically or by fashion. Then there was a space like that on the page, and I waited. Withal, a more completed man is distinguishable only to himself. And see, that was what I was really going to talk about for the last 50 minutes, but I didn't get around to it. If you know anything, you're only distinguishable by knowing it to yourself. Because there's nothing to distinguish out there. The world is not waiting for you to say, well, I'm here. As a matter of fact, I understand now what life's about, and I don't have anything particular to do this afternoon, so I'll be glad to tell you. And the parade says, now think that you're one guy standing on the side in the parade. That is 6 million people in the parade. Suddenly you have turned the tables. Write that down. And you say, I'll be glad to tell you people, I finally understand what's going on here. And I'll be glad to tell you, I got a couple of hours free today. The 6 million people, the parade stops and it looks at you and they all say, wait right here, we'll be right back. Seeing as how this is an inauspicious place to stop, we won't. Stop!